Last week we spoke about Parshas Bereshis, and Baruch Hashem, several thousand people saw the session, and that's extremely gratifying. And first of all, I would like to thank Binyamin Sofer, who's really, I can't do this. I mean, it's all his work. And, I'm a bit of a Luddite, but, it comes to these kind of things, it's beyond me. But this week, on Sunday, I went to visit Rav Feivel Cohen, together with Rabbi Yaakov, who's Rosh Hashanah of Beis Yosef in Brooklyn. And Rav Feivel Cohen was one of my Rabbeim in Cham, Berlin during my teenage years. And Rabbi Yaakov was also a Talmud of his in Yeshiva of Eastern Parkway. So we went to visit him. He lives in Lakewood now, Pine River Village. And he can't get out so much, so we went to visit him. So we talked mostly in Torah, but we also talked about Gedolei Yisrael. What are Gedolei Yisrael? And he told us that his definition of a Gadol B'Yisrael is a person who works for Habatzas HaTorah without looking to get anything in return. So by that definition, Binyamin Sofer, who's doing this purely for Habatzas Torah, is a Gadol B'Yisrael. I can't say that the same definition would apply to me, because I probably have personal benefit from it, but Binyamin Sofer is certainly a Gadol B'Yisrael. So last week we spoke about Brias Olam and Ikrei Emunah, and I wanted to just point out that it's not my purpose here to use the Parsha as a springboard to give speeches on different topics or lectures. It's not my purpose. My purpose is to learn the Chumash and to learn the Psukim and to explain them according to Pirush Rashi in Chumash, Pirush Rashi in Avos, and according to the Rambam in the Moreh Nevuchim and in Mishnah Torah and in his Pirush on Pirkei Avos. Sometimes the topics will be broader, and sometimes, I would want to even get into issues of grammar and digduk, not at great length, because I understand most people don't have too much patience for that, but whatever the pasuk requires to understand what it's saying. Before we go to Parshas Noach, I would just like to say a few more things about Bereshis, because there are a couple of omissions that I made, and I'd like to add one more thing. We spoke about the idea that the Rebbeinu Shalom is the infinite, the Ein Od Milvadoi, and we raised the question of how can this world exist if he's the infinite? Why doesn't the existence of the world infringe on his infinity? And the Mekubalim say that there was Tzimtzum. Tzimtzum means that the Rebbeinu Shalom contracted himself, so to speak, and then there was place for the world to exist. But this is a little bit difficult to understand, because if he contracted himself, then he is no longer infinite. So we presented the idea that the world really exists in the mind of the Rebbeinu Shalom. As soon as the Rebbeinu Shalom conceived the world, it was already in existence. Baruch Shalom Havaya Olam. As soon as he had the thought, the world existed, and the world does not have any existence independent of the Rebbeinu Shalom. And the Rambam says that if a person could imagine that for a moment that the Rebbeinu Shalom would Chas v'Shalom cease to exist, the world would automatically cease to exist. If the world ceased to exist, the Rebbeinu Shalom would still be there. And I spoke about this at some length. I did not bring this back to explain the problem of Tzimtzum. So what I would like to suggest is, since the world exists in the Rebbeinu Shalom's mind, that even if there's a Tzimtzum in the world, in the Rebbeinu Shalom's mind, it does not infringe on the affinity of his own existence. That means that the Rebbeinu Shalom is infinite, there's no bounds to it, But in his mind, he created a world in which he's not necessarily present in the way that he's present otherwise. I also want, there's another point that, the Shem Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. So when we say Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, we refer to it as the Shem Havaya, which is the same letters rearranged. Instead of Yud and a Hey and a Vav and a Hey, we have Hey and a Vav and a Yud and a Hey. So one purpose of this is because we don't want to say the Shem. We can't say the Shem. However, I think there's more to that, because Havaya means existence. And the only existence is the existence of Hashem. Hashem is existence. There is no other existence without Hashem. So the Shem Havaya really reflects the existence of Hashem. Another point which I didn't really, just an omission, I asked the Rashi says that M'tchila Olam Machshava Livers Olam Midas Adin. Hashem wanted to create the world with Midas Adin, but he saw that it would not have a kiyum, so he higdim Midas Arachmim Ushetofa Midas Adin. So the automatic question is, Hashem had an idea, he had a thought, and then he thought it over, and he realized that it won't work. So, what does this mean now, Hashem? So I explained that the difference between Midas Adin and Midas Arachmim is that Midas Adin is perfect cause and effect. Midas Arachmim means that there is wiggle room. It's not perfect cause and effect. So Hashem brought forward Midas Arachmim, which was meant to be used with his conduct with people, and he combined that with Midas Adin to introduce into the world a certain element of uncertainty. And therefore, he can manipulate. Otherwise, if everything is cause and effect, if a person, got cancer and maybe he would have to die, because cause and effect, perfect cause and effect. But he brought forward Midas Rachman to say that there can be spontaneous emissions, there is a certain randomness, and therefore it's possible for people to survive with Rachman. But what does Olam Machshava mean? He thought. So Olam Machshava doesn't mean that he had first the thought of Midas Adin and then he changed his mind to combine Midas Rachman. Olam Machshava means when the Rebbeinu Shalom decided to create a world, by definition, it has to be Midas Adin. It has to be perfectly engineered. Chazaka Chavrein Moitzi Dovashin Mesukan Tachas Yod. The Tam Chacham always gives you whatever he does is complete and it works. So the Rebbeinu Shalom creates a world, then that world has to be Midas Adin. It has to work. It has to be well engineered. However, the Rebbeinu Shalom understood from the beginning. He understood. The Olam Machshava means that the very thought of creating a world means it has to be Midas Adin. The physical world, it has to be perfect cause and effect. That is perfect engineering. But the Rebbeinu Shalom understood that there would be a problem with Rachmim. How could a person get sick and daven, and Hashem will give him a cure if that violates the perfect Midas Adin? So he had to combine Midas Rachmim to introduce a certain element of uncertainty where he's able to manipulate the processes of the world. Okay, I forgot last week to bring it back to explain what Olam Machshava means. There's one more point I would like to make about Bereshis. It says, "V'ruach Elokim rachefes al pnei hamayim." So Rashi says, "The Kiseh Hakavod merachev al pnei hamayim." What does this mean? That the Kiseh Hakavod was on the water. What does that mean? So I'd like to explain this. The Torah says, brings a medrash in Archaim Tufkuf Pei Aleph. He says that the Goyim, look how different Klal Yisrael is from the Goyim. The Goyim, they come out of court and they don't know what the verdict is going to be. And they're sad and anxious and they're worried. They wear black clothing. But the Yidden, when we call Yisrael, Einon Kain. We're not like that. Leivshim Levonim, we wear white clothing. Apparently they used to wear white clothing in those days, more than today. Today is mostly black. But they come out wearing white clothing, and they're happy Rosh Hashanah. Lefi sheyodim sheHaKadosh Baruch Hu yaseh lahem nes. They know that the Rebbeinu Shalom will do for them a miracle. What does that mean? What does that mean? A miracle? I mean, if you daven to Rebbeinu Shalom and you do tshuva and you have rachamim. Rachamim is a miracle. Rachamim is not a miracle. It's one of the midas of the Rebbeinu Shalom. He's a racham. It's not a miracle. So, there's a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah that says that the Rebbeinu Shalom mata, what's the lashon over there? Mata klapi chesed. He tips the scales. We have our avainas, we have our mitzvahs and our averis, and he tips the scales in our favor. He puts his hand on the scale. So there's a machlokes in the Gemara. Noisei yokovish. Does he lift it? That means he lifts up the sins, which automatically makes the mitzvahs go down and become heavier and tip the scales in our favor. Or kovesh, he presses down on the mitzvahs, so that makes it tipped in our favor. That's what Rashi says in Rosh Hashanah. The same Gemara appears in Erchen on the Ches, and Rashi says that kovesh means, what's the lashon of Rashi? HaKadosh Baruch Hu kovesh umastir avonos tachas mechilos Kiseh Hakavod k'dei she'achriyu haschuyos. He takes our averos and puts them into like little tunnels under the Kiseh Hakavod. Puts them in little tunnels. What does this mean? What does this mean? So I'd like to first explain the Rashi, and then I'll explain that Gemara. The Rambam says that the Rebbeinu Shalom does not interact directly with the world. He's too high. Like the lashon of the Alshach and Kael says, Achor. The Rebbeinu Shalom does not interact directly with the world. He interacts through malachim. And what are malachim? I mean, there are some malachim that we know, Gabriel, Raphael, Michael, we know these malachim, but the Rambam says that all chukei ateva, all the laws of nature are malachim. They do the Rebbeinu Shalom's will, and by that they are called malachim. That there's gravity. Gravity is a malach. It fulfills the will of the Rebbeinu Shalom that heavy things should fall down to earth, so it's a malach. So all the forces of nature, everything is a malach. That a seed grows into a tree, that's a malach. All these things are malachim. Now, Rashi says that Yom Echad, why is it called Echad? He was the only one in the world because the malachim were created on the second day. On the first day, there were no malachim. He didn't create the malachim yet. That means that the processes of nature began on the second day. On the first day, there was no nature. On the second day, when it created malachim, then the forces of nature were activated and they participated in the development of the world. But on the first day, there was no nature. So how did the Rebbeinu Shalom create the world? And how did he do everything on the first day? How did he do create Shemayim Ba'aretz, and how did he made V'Oyer, he made light? How did he do this? So the answer is that he created something which is higher than a malach. And the Gemara says in Pesachim, 7 things were created before the world in preparation for creation, and one of them was the Kiseh Hakavod. The Kiseh Hakavod was not always there. The Kiseh Hakavod is a creation. It was created right before the creation of the world. So the Rebbeinu Shalom created a Kiseh Hakavod which is much higher than a malach, well above the malachim. It's a kind of a malach, like a super malach, and it's as close to the Rebbeinu Shalom as it could possibly be. But it's a malach, so it's a kind of a malach. So on the first day, he used the Kiseh Hakavod that he created before the creation of the world, and with the Kiseh Hakavod, he created the world. So the Kiseh Hakavod is higher than malachim. It's higher than Teva.
The malachim were created on the
second day. Right. But the first day, whatever was done on the first day, how was it done? So Rashi tells us. He says it was malachim created on the second day. So immediately the question, if according to what the Rambam says, and I'm sure Rashi would agree, that the Rebbeinu Shalom acts through Malachim. So what happened on the first day? So Rashi tells us that the Kiseh Hakavod was merachef al pnei hamayim. Whatever was happening was being done through the Kiseh Hakavod. We find that the Gemara says that when Moshe Rabbeinu came up to Shemayim, the Malachim said, "What is the human being doing over here in Shemayim?" So they wanted to kill him. Moshe was afraid they were going to kill him. So Rabbi Shem told him, "Echoiz b'Kiseh Hakavod." Grab onto the Kiseh Hakavod. When you grab onto the Kiseh Hakavod, then there is a teva. We know there's a teva. There's nature. There's a teva in the Olam HaTachton, all the forces of nature that we know. There's also a teva in the Olam HaElyon. There is the Bezin Shel Mala. There are rules. There are, what kind of tshuva is accepted, what kind of tshuva is not accepted. There are rules. There's a teva elyon. There are rules. What's in the Shemayim? So the Rabban Shem told him that apparently the Malachim had the power to kill him. Otherwise, what was he worried about? Rabban Shem should have told him, "Don't worry about them. They can't do anything." No, they could. Why? Because he was violating the teva elyon. He didn't. A human being, a yulud isha, a person born of a woman, did not belong in the Olam HaElyon. So it was a violation, and they could have killed him. Rabban Shem told him, "No. Grab onto the Kiseh Hakavod, and if you're holding onto the Kiseh Hakavod, then you're lemala b'teva tachta, you're ma'ala b'teva elyon. You are not subject to teva." We find the same thing that Menashe, the king of Yehuda, who was a terrible, terrible king, and not going to get into Menashe, and he wanted to do tshuva after like many years of subverting Klal Yisrael. And his tshuva was not accepted because he was a chayta machdiyas harabim. If you sin yourself and you cause others to sin, then your tshuva is not accepted. So the Bezin Shemala did not accept his tshuva. It was not by the rules of the Teva Elyon. It was not acceptable. So the Chazal say, Chatira tachas Kiseh Hakavod. He made a tunnel under the Kiseh Hakavod. I don't know what tunnels, but it's whatever it means. But he brought him through the Kiseh Hakavod, and when he brings him to the Kiseh Hakavod, then the rules don't apply. And even tshuva, like Menashe's tshuva, which is really not acceptable, but if he brought it to the Kiseh Hakavod, then it could be accepted because lamala from the teva. The same thing we find. So that's what Rashi means. That is kovish the averis tachs Kiseh Hakavod. He puts them on the averis under Kiseh Hakavod. That does not mean that he's moichel them. He's not moichel them, but he takes them and he puts them into Kiseh Hakavod and he keeps them there, and therefore whatever din was supposed to be a judgment was supposed to be passed on them is not, because everything is in suspension, and this is in violation of the Teva Elyon by din. But if you go to the Kiseh Hakavod, if the Rebbe Shalom puts that on the Kiseh Hakavod, then he can give you rachmim and let you go for another year. That's what that Gemara means. So what the measures that the Torah brings is saying, we're betuchim sheyas lanu nes. We know that the Rebbeinu Shalom, when it really comes to it, he will make a nes for us. What is a nes? He will be kovish our averis tachas Kiseh Hakavod. He will put our averis into the Kiseh Hakavod, and that is a nes. It's a miracle. Why? Because it overrides the Teva Elyon. So it is a nes. Now let's turn to Parshas Noach. So we know that Noach was the one who gave Musar to the people of the Dora Mabul. They were terrible. There are rayas and tremendous amount of Avodah Zarah and gezel. They were thievery, and even though there was like nigmer dinam el ala chamas, that the final straw was the thievery, but really what they did, for what they were punished, was harayas and Avodah Zarah. And Noach, he gave them Musar about that. They didn't listen, and he was the one that was saved. But ironically, Noach was the one that caused the Mabul. He caused the Mabul. Why? Because when Noach was born, it says, Zeh nachmeinu mimaseinu. Why did Lamech call him Noach? What does the word Noach mean? Zeh nachmeinu mimaseinu mitzvah yadeinu min adam asher irara. The Ban Shloim, when Adam Arishain ate from the Eitz Hadas, so the Ban Shloim said, and because of you, I am cursing the earth. And there are going to be thorns and thistles, and you want to get some food, you're going to have to struggle, and it's going to be very hard. And now, when Noach was born, so Lamech said that, he will give us comfort and relief from the troubles that we have, the struggles that we have, dealing with this cursed earth. How did he know? How did he know he was a baby? So either it was a tefillah, some Mefarshim say, or it was a nevuah, and the Kiseh Hakavod brings a medrash that Noach was Neilad Mal. He was born with a bris. And when Hashem cursed the earth, so Adam asked him, Ad Masai, how long is the earth going to be cursed? So he said, until somebody is born with a bris. When that's going to happen, it's over. So when Noach was born and he had a bris, and they knew Kabbalah from Adam that the curse will come to an end, then they understood that this is he's bringing us comfort and relief. Now, in Koheles,
so the land didn't produce any grains.
It did, but it was a struggle. You had to, just to get anything, you probably got your hand stuck with thorns. I don't know what thistles are, but probably also not a pleasant thing. Kaitz v'dardar, and they could produce, but it was very, very difficult. And now when Noach came, Rashi says he invented plowing. Plow, all kinds of agricultural tools, and the thorns and thistles went away. So now it was much easier. You just plowed and it grew and you ate. So in Koheles is talking about the irrationality of a person chasing after material wealth. He says, you're gonna run after material wealth, you're gonna build up a big estate, and you think it's gonna last. This will be your lasting achievement on the world. Of course, you're gonna be dead, and it's gonna be in Shemayim. We're not talking about that. But what are you doing? You're running after, you're building up an estate, a lot of money, a lot of investments. What are you doing? You're gonna die. The person that comes after you may not be as industrious as you, may not be as responsible, your heirs, then they may just squander all of it, and it'll all be gone. And then he says another thing. He says, you may not even be doing them a favor, because if you give them so much unearned wealth, who knows what's going to happen to them? They're going to become decadent, they're going to become, drug addicts. How are you doing them a favor? And Rashi brings that when the Ban Shloim gave the people a life of ease when Noach was born, that led to the Mabul. Rashi in the second parak of Koheles, I don't remember which pasuk, could find it. So that led to the Mabul, because the people, as long as people were busy struggling with the earth, and and finally get some food, all right, fine. But now they have a life of leisure. They could just very easily grow crops and eat, and And then what do you do? So he went to Avodah Zarah. So actually the proliferation of Avodah Zarah was really a result of the birth of Noach, which gave them relief from the curse of the Adamah. Okay, that's what it was. Not his fault. But why? I don't talk about the idea of Avodah Zarah. Why was there such a big proliferation? What happened? So the Rambam says like this: B'mei Enosh, in the times of Enosh, who was a grandson of Adam, Tov bnei Adam Toz Gadol. The people at that time, they knew that there's a God. They knew that and they thought that the stars do his bidding, just like Malachim, the stars do his bidding. They thought maybe the stars have intelligence, but certainly it could be that the stars somehow, with cosmic rays, have some effect on the earth. Maybe, I don't know. But the Tov Bnei Adam Torah Godel, they made a mistake, and they thought V'zeu Ritzayin Hakel Baruch Hu L'Gadol L'Chabed Mi Shegodloi V'Chibloi V'Kibdoi K'moi Shamelech Reitzel L'Chabed Oim Dun L'Fanav. A king wants that his ministers should be respected and honored. In the same way, the Rebbeinu Shalom wanted that people should worship and honor his ministers, which are the stars and whatever else that they should. And that's V'zeu Kvod Shel Malach. And they did all this Kedei Lahasig Ritzayin Haboirei B'da'atam Hara. They wanted to fulfill the will of Hashem according to their misguided thoughts. That's what they wanted. That was it. But then what happened? I mean, I guess they found it easier to worship a star than to worship God, because God is the infinite, the unknowable, and it's not relatable. So it's a little bit difficult to serve God that you don't know anything about him. So maybe he wanted you to serve him by serving his ministers. So that's what they wanted to do. After a while, they had the V'yeh Sheker, and they told them to put up idols and do all these different kind of things. And listen to this. V'kivish orcha hayomim, after the length of time, nishtaka Hashem hanichbad v'anoira mikol hayikum midaitam v'lo hikiru. That the Shem hanichbad v'anoira was nishtakach. What does that mean? In the beginning, he calls him a Kael Baruch Hu. He calls him Kael. Over here he says nishtakach Hashem hanichbad v'anoira. What exactly does that mean? Until Ad Shenoilad Amudah Shel Olam V'hu Avraham Avinu. So what is the meaning of Nishtachas Hashem HaNichbad V'Anoira? So the Rambam in the Meir says that, I think I've mentioned before, it's impossible for us to have any kind of knowledge of God. When we say that God is a Rachum, that he has mercy, it doesn't mean what it means to us. All these things are descriptions of his actions, of what he does. And if he does an action that if a human being would do it, it would come from an emotion of mercy, then we call it Rachum. But God doesn't have emotions. God is the infinite, the perfect. Emotions are a weakness. He doesn't have emotions. So we everything that we know about him, we know what he does, and we give them names. Elokim means his control of the world. Every name tells us something that he does, but him himself we don't know. The only thing we could know about him are negative attributes. We know what he is not. Well, we say that God has wisdom. What does that mean? What do you mean he has wisdom? Is it like our wisdom, just like a higher IQ, a bigger capacity? No, it has no connection to human wisdom. We say God has power. What does that mean? And also, everything is one. There are no separate attributes. A person has wisdom and he has strength. These are two different parts of him. His brain has wisdom and his arm has strength. One is not connected to the other. But the Rebbeinu Shalom does not have attributes. It's achdus. It's yichud. He is one. He has one essence. Only one essence. The Rambam calls it one simple essence. It is not a composite. It is not complicated. He has an essence that is unknowable. And everything that he does comes from the same essence. His wisdom comes from the same essence as power. He gives an example of how fire can destroy. It could also make something hard. That's just like a muscle, just to help you understand a little bit. But the same essence can do many different things. And it's all one. And we don't know anything about him. All we know, we know that he gives an example. Let's say you tell a person, people don't know what a ship is. So the first person, you tell him that the ship is not solid. Okay? He knows that. The second person comes in, who also was there already, or whatever. Another person comes in, and he knows what the first person knows, and he's told that the ship is not a cylinder. And the third person comes in, and he tells him that the ship is not a cone. So now the first person knows one piece of information, the second person knows two, the third person knows three. He goes through a list, but it is three. Which one knows more about the ship? The third person, because he has three pieces of information, and the first person has only one piece of information. However, does the third person have any idea of what a ship is? No. He just knows what it's not. So that's, he says, when it comes to Rabbi Shalom, we cannot know what he is, we can only know what he is not. We know when we say about his wisdom, we know that he is not ignorant. But the wisdom that he has, no idea what that is. That's what the Reinman says. However, I'd like to give a hypothetical. Let's say there's a person, like I come here and I tell you I met a person, and I tell you the person's name. The person's name is, I was trying to find a name which wouldn't tell you anything about this person. And the best I can come up with is Lynn. Because Lynn, it could be a man, it could be a woman, it could be, I don't know if Haredim ever used the name Lynn, but there are plenty of Jews that use the name Lynn. It could be a Westerner, it could be a Chinaman, it could be, Lynn doesn't tell you anything about this person. Nothing. But do you know anything about this person? Actually, you do. You know that his or her, we don't know if it's a man or a woman, we know that this person's name is Lynn. So we have something that we know about this person. We know the name is Lynn. When it comes to Rabbeinu Shalom, the Rambam says that all the names of the Rabbeinu Shalom, all the many names, they all reflect his manifestation in the world, the things that he does. The name Yud Kei Vav Kei, the tetragrammaton, the four-letter word, that four-letter name, that may not be pronounced, that is the Shema Etzem. That is his name. That is the name of his essence. It is not a reflection of things that he does. So that's all. So even though we can't know anything about the Rabbi Shalom, we don't know what he's like, but we do know his name. We know his name is Yud Kei Vav Kei. That we know. When the people in the time of the Mabul, or before the Mabul, when they decided that they're going to worship his servants and eventually worship idols, they still knew that there was a Rabbi Shalom, but they really couldn't connect to him. But they knew that there was a Rabbi Shalom until it was Nishtakach Hashem Anichbad Ba'Noira. The name Yud Kei Vav Kei was forgotten, and without knowing even his name, then they lost all connection. They had no connection to him, and then it was total Avodah Zarah. They forgot that the Rabbi Shalom exists. Everything was into the idols. Until Avraham came along. That's what Rambam says, Amudah Shalaylam, the pillar of the world. Now Avraham also didn't know the name Yudke Vavke. It says in the beginning of Eira, Shmi Yudke Vavke, Lo Nodati Lehem, right? Eira La'avos, and I didn't tell them the name. I told it to them later, but in the beginning, when Avraham was Moisen Nefesh for the Rebbeinu Shalom, he didn't know the name. But he came to the understanding that the idols are false, and there is an infinite, unknowable God, and he knows nothing about him, not even his name, and still he was ready to give his life for the Rebbeinu Shalom. That was Avraham. But the other people that had turned away and ended up serving the servants and the idols, when they forgot the Shem Anichbad V'Anoira, when they forgot the Shem Yudke Vavke, then they had no connection whatever to Rebbeinu Shalom. He was completely forgotten. That's what the Reinman is saying. So this is what happened in the Dara Mabul. The Dara Mabul, the people forgot the Shem Anichbad V'Anoira, and it was completely forgotten. Now, the Mishnah Brura, let me see one second here. The Mishnah Brura, right at the beginning, Siman Aleph, Zivkot and Dalet, says that a person should always think that he's Omed Lefnei Hashem Yisbarach. He's standing in front of God. A person should always be aware of God and to know that he's standing in front of him. And then he brings this. Because for B'Shem Arizal, the Arizal said, Sheyitzayir Shem Avaya Tomit Keneged Einov. He should have the Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei in front of his eyes. V'zeh Soit Shivisi Hashem L'Negdi Samid. Shivisi Hashem L'Negdi Samid, he says, doesn't just mean that the Rebbeinu Shalom is in front of me. It means that the Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei is in front of me. V'zeh To'eles Godel in Yira. That will help you for Yira because it will help you relate to the Rebbeinu Shalom in a direct way. This is, we know the Rebbeinu Shalom's name, should always keep his name. That keeps him in front of you more than just knowing the things that he does in this world. Shem Yudke Vavke. There's an old minig, and people write Sforim, that they start the Hagdama with four words that are, the first letters are Yud, Ke, Vav, Ke. Yisbarach, Yotzer, V'Yisala, Habayre, whatever they pick. But it's Yud Kei, Vav Kei. Recently, in recent years, Sforim don't necessarily start that way. They start with Oidel Hashem B'chal Levav, I thank him, it's wonderful, Hashem Levav, but they don't use that minig. With my Sforim, I always do that, because the Shem Yud Kei, Vav Kei. I want to be, you put in the Shem Yudke, Vavke, in the beginning of a Sefer, to say, because that is directly the Shem Etzem. So you put in Yudke, Vavke. And this led to Avodah Zarah, because the Shem Yudke, Vavke was forgotten, and the Dara Mabul reached a point where they totally forgot the Shem Anichbad V'Anoira, and they were totally into Avodah Zarah, had absolutely no connection to Rebbeinu Shalom, and that brought on the Mabul. So the pasuk begins, Eila told us Noach, Tzadik Tom Hoya B'Deraisa. So it says, Noach was a tzaddik in his generations. So Rashi says, B'Deraisa, Yesh M'Rabbeinu Doshim Moisei L'Shvach. Even in his decadent, depraved generation, he was able to be a tzaddik. Kolshkein, Ilohoya B'der Tzaddikim, Oy Tzaddik Yoser. If he had been in a better environment with the tzaddikim, he would have been even greater. And then, V'yesh Dosh Moisei L'Gnai, like it's a derogatory statement. L'fi Doirei Hoya Tzaddik. In his generation, he was a tzaddik. V'Ilohoya B'der Shel Avraham, Loi Haya Nechshav Leklum. It would have been nothing. Now, Noach was a Navi. The Rebbeinu Shalom talked to him. He was a tzaddik, but he's saying that if he lived in the time of Adam, in time of Avraham, he would have been considered nothing. Why would it be nothing? Maybe he would be, how could you say it would be nothing? So I want to offer one pshat, but then I want to offer the second pshat, which I think is better. So it says, Medrash says, the last pasuk in Bereshit, the Noach matza chaim b'einei Hashem, that he found grace in the eyes of Hashem. So the Medrash says, afilu Noach shenishtayer mehem, even though Noach was survived from the Mabul, lo hoya kedai, he wasn't deserving of it. Elo shematza chaim, he found favor in God's in the Rebbeinu Shalom's eyes. So, what does this mean exactly? What does this mean that he found? What is chayin? What is the idea of chayin? So the Gemara says in Soita, Rav Yochanan, Sholosh chinas hain. Chayin hamokum al yoshvav. People, the place where people live, it finds favor with them. You may live in a place, somebody will come and I'll say, oh, what kind of place is this? You know, the streets and this and the smog, those. But the people that live there, to them, they see it in a favorable light. Chayin isha al bala. A wife has chayin for a husband. The husband looks at her in a favorable light. Chayin hamekach aloik choy. Once you buy something, before you buy something, you look at it, you think, check the consumer. Are there still consumer reports? But you check the consumer reports and you see what people say about it. You think and this, and you comparison shop. But once you buy it, it's the greatest. It has favor. So Rashi says, "Chein hamokum al yoshvav," that the place where a person lives finds favor with them. Afilu hura nir lehem toiv. Even if it's not good, they see it as good. Chein isha tamud abala. A woman finds favor in her husband's eyes. Afilu hi mechueres. Even if she's not so pretty, but nice is kein beinav. He finds her favor. He finds her pretty. So this is what chayin means. Chayin means that the ability to overlook flaws and to look at only the good and see it in a favorable light. That's what chayin means. We have in we say in Birchas Kohanim, we say at the end, we say Hiratzen, and we say Shetitneinu l'chein l'chesed l'rachmim beinechav kol re'enu, that everybody should look at us with favor. Kishem shenasata as Yosef tzadikecha. I don't remember the exact words. I thought I wrote it down. But Kishem shenasata as Yosef tzadikecha b'shah shel bishay aviv ksaynas pasim l'chein l'chesed b'chol. So, what does that mean? When Yaakov put him on the Ksaynas Pasim, I mean, that was that they looked at him terribly, the brothers. So what he's saying is that once he put him on the Ksaynas Pasim, then his fate was sealed. They would, throw him in the pit, and he'd end up by the Ishmaelim, and he'd end up in Mitzrayim, and he would be in a hostile environment. And if you look at the Psukim later Parshas, everybody found him wonderful. Everybody thought he was great, and they gave him good jobs, and they treated him extremely well. Why did they treat him extremely well? Because, as we say, at that moment, when he was exposed to danger, when he put on the Ksaynas Pasim, Hashem gave him a bracha of chen, that wherever he would go, he would be seen favorably. So then, according to this medrash, is Matzah Chaim, that Noach had Chaim. That means Noach maybe had chesroinus which are not specified, and Hashem saw him with Chaim because he was the best that there was. So he overlooked, so to speak, whatever his flaws were, and he saw him as a very favorable light. So maybe what Rashi is saying, is that at that time it was necessary to view him with Chain because he was well above everybody else around him. But if he had lived in the time of Avraham, then maybe the Rebbe Shalom would not have overlooked all his flaws and all his problems, and then he would be nothing compared to what he was now. Now we view him as a tzaddik tam d'oraisa. He's a tzaddik. He does this and then. Okay, we're not gonna look at those. That's the chayin. Okay, so this is one pshat in Rashi, but I still think that's not. I don't think that's the pshat in Rashi.
So Yosef wore the Ksenius Pasim throughout his journey.
I don't know if he did it, but it was just. No, he didn't. The Ksenius Pasim was dipped in blood.
Right.
But from the moment that he gave him the Ksenius Pasim and he triggered the jealousy of the brothers, that's when he was in danger. And then, who knows what would happen to him, where he would go, and he'd be at the mercy of many people. So Hashem gave him a bracha of chayin. Whoever he encountered would look at him as a wonderful person. That's the bracha of chayin. Is this what Rashi means? Perhaps. But I want to bring something else. It says in Parshas Shmini that but Nadav Avihu were the sons of Aaron. They were the heirs apparent to the leadership of Klal Yisrael. So the Sifra says, Kivin Shroas Moshe v'Aaron ha'malachim tchila v'em bo'im achrayim. They saw that Moshe and Aaron were walking. This I want to conclude with this. That they saw. Oh no, I have something else to say. Never mind. So they saw Moshe and Aaron walking ahead of them, and they were walking behind them. So Nadav said to Avihu, "Oid shnei zakenim alalu mesim v'anu ninagas hakol." Soon these two old people are going to die, and we will be the leaders of Klal Yisrael. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, mi koiver es mi. We will see who buries whom, and they died. I mean, Nadav Avihu were tremendously great people, and Moshe Rabbeinu, when they died, he said apparently they're greater than us. I mean, why would they say something like this? Why would they say that we're waiting for them to die? I mean, what? So, there's a Gemara in Megillah. The Gemara says that Rabbi came to visit Rabbi Shua ben Karcha. Rabbi Shua ben Karcha was very, very, very old. I'm not sure how old, but really old. And he asked him, B'ma arachta yomim? How did you live so long? So he told him a number of things. He never looked at, it's enough Chavches Amar Aleph in Megillah. He never looked at a Rosh's face. I mean, he told a number of things that he said. Okay. He said, what do you want to know? Does it bother you that I'm living so long? So he said, no, it's Torah, I want to learn it. In other words, what's happening at Shua ben Karcha is Torah, I want to learn it. So he told him. B'shas b'tirosai, when Rebbe's getting ready to leave, so he told him, Barcheni, give me a bracha. So he said, Hi rotzen shetagia l'chatzi yomai. A bunch of help that you should live half as much as I've lived. So Rabbi said, and all of it not? Why you give me such a bracha? You give me, I should only live half as long as you? What's wrong if I live all as long as you? So he said, Haboy macharecha behema yiru. The ones that come after you should be shepherds and take care of animals. So Rashi explains, Ein toivel it's not good for you to live so long. Your sons are your heirs, and they are going to be your successors. And if you live very long, they'll always be just regular people. So you see over here that I mean, not for all people, but for people that have destinies for greatness, if they have a father in front of them who's greater or is in that position and they cannot get to it, then a person would be stifled. He would not be able, a person has to be able to reach the fulfillment of his destiny. And as long as the father stands in the way, then they cannot reach that destiny. That's what Nadav Avi was saying. They had their destiny. They were supposed to be the leaders of Klal Yisrael, and they felt stifled. They weren't looking for gaiva. They weren't looking to have kavod. They were looking to grow. They were looking to become, as they could not grow into being the people that they were meant to be as long as Moshe Baron was there. Well, Moshe Baron would pass away, then they could reach the office of leadership. They could become the leaders, and a person rises to his situation. And then if they would be the leaders, then however great they were now, they would be able to reach much higher levels of greatness. And that's what they were saying, that they felt that impatient, I guess, that they wanted to reach those levels of greatness. And as long as Moshe Aaron were there, they could not because they needed people to ask them something, but it's just the nature of how it is, that if you are in the second position, you cannot be fulfilled. So this Gemara says in Avodah Zarah, very similar thing. Let's be grateful to our ancestors. This means the ones that did the Egel. If they hadn't done the Avera, if they had not done the Avera, after Matan Torah, the people who were Makabel Torah were supposed to live forever. They were not going to die. But once they did the Chet Egel, then they had to die again. So they said, we have to be grateful to them because they did the Avera, so they're going to die. And if they wouldn't die, Anu Kemish Leibanu Loilam, we would be as if we didn't come to the world. So Rashi says, Flishahein Chayim Loilam, they live forever. Because man shein kayomim, as long as they exist, as long as they're alive, ein anu chashuvim leklum. We are not considered anything. I guess it's a relative statement, but it could still be big. But we're not considered what we should be. Ein anu chashuvim leklum. So I think, and that's the lashon that Rashi says, Ilu haya b'dorah shel Avraham, lo haya nechshav leklum. Which is the exact lashon that Rashi uses in Avodah Zarah. Ein anu chashuvim leklum. That means that if Noach had lived in the time of Avraham, and his destiny was to be a leader, and Avraham was there, he would always be in Avraham's shadow, and he would never be able to grow into the person that he was meant to be, and that is called Ein Nachshav L'Klum. Ein Anu Chashuvim L'Klum, like Rashi says in Avodah Zarah, Ein Lehoya Nachshav L'Klum. Okay, I want to include one thing. I just want to make a very small thing, then I'll conclude. The pasuk says that after they came out of the Teva, Noach got drunk, and Cham came in and he castrated him. So he said, Or Kanan Eved Avodim Yilechav. Cham should be a slave to his brothers. I just want to read you an Ibn Ezra. V'yesh Oimrim, some say, Hiakushim, the black people, Heim Avodim, why are they enslaved? Bavur Shakil El Noach es Cham. Because Noach cursed Cham, so this is the curse of Cham. That's why black people are enslaved. I guess in his time, he didn't meet many free black people. But he says, why is it when people say that this is the curse of Cham, that's why they're slaves. V'hinei shakchu, they forgot. Ki melech harishon achar Mabul hayom mikush. The first king after the Mabul was Nimrod. Nimrod was from Cush, from Cham, and from Cush. So you cannot say that the individual blacks have to be slaves. What does the pasuk mean? Eved avodim you le'achav. He doesn't say. That's all he says. I think the pasuk is more in a global sense that the white race dominates the black race. That we see. That is just geopolitics. That's how it works. And maybe that the imperialism of the white race, maybe that is from the klola of Noach. But individual blacks to be enslaved, that is not justified by the klola of Noach. Okay, now enough of that. So Rashi says like this: Ma ra Cham shesay. Why did Cham castrate Noach? Why? So he says, Amar lam la'echav, he said to his brothers, Adam arishin shnei bonim la'ayolai. He only had 2 sons. V'harag zeh zeh b'shvil Yerushas ha'olam. And one killed the other because of the legacy of the world, to have the world. I mean, the pasuk really doesn't say that. The pasuk says that he was makana because of the carbon, but that was symbolic, because the our father has 3 sons. He needs a 4th son. What does this mean? You have an empty world. Everybody is gone. Only Noach and his 3 sons. And the entire world is open to you. All of Europe and Asia and Africa and all the continents, they're all open to you. An enormous world. There are 3 people and you have a 4th person. Too much, we're going to kill each other. What does it mean? I mean, within a few generations, these 3 people will have, thousands and millions and billions of people. And, they'll have many of them kill each other, of course. But, what was he saying? He was saying is this. Cain killed Hevel. Why did he kill Hevel? Because there was a conflict in ideology. Cain was a material person. He was a man of the earth. Hevel was a spiritual person. He was more, towards God. So there's a conflict of materialism and spiritualism. The Kadmonim, the early people, they established the streams of ideology in the world. Cain was materialism, and Hevel was spiritualism. When Cain saw that the Rebbeinu Shalom accepted Hevel's carbon, so he said, "Oh, that means that he's going to be victorious over me, and the world will become spiritual, not the ideology that I want to establish." So he killed him. So he said, "Now you have 3 sons." Cham said that Noach has 3 sons. They were the new first people. The world was destroyed. They were the ones, and they would establish what goes on in the world. Shem, Cham, and Yafes. Shem is spirituality, seeking the Ribbono Shel Olam. That's represented by Shem. Cham represents materialism, Avodah Zarah. That's what Cham represents. Yafes represents secular humanism, philosophy, learning, that is the chachma of secular chachma. So these are 3 different streams. There is spirituality, there is Avodah Zarah, and there is secularism. And these 3 streams are in conflict. If you look at the world, everything that happens in this world, kamat, on a larger scale, is a result of one of these, the conflict of one or the other of these ideologies against another one. Christianity Christianity comes from shame, comes from spirituality. Of course, it's not what it should be, but it's the descendant of shame. So the Christians overcame the Greeks and the Romans. We have today in the world, we have like communism, and these are secularism. These are secular movements. So all the movements of the world are religious against secular, against paganism. These are the 3 movements of the world, and they always in conflict, and they always cause slaughter. So he says, are you going to introduce a 4th son who's going to introduce a 4th ideology? The world can barely survive with the conflict of 3 ideologies. A 4th son would introduce another one. What would it be? I don't know. Maybe environmentalism, maybe something else. I don't know. He didn't do it, so I don't know. But if there had been a 4th son, there would have been there would have been another ideology. So he said that the world will not survive the conflict of four ideologies.